And namaskar to everyone. I'm Radhika, representing Voices from the Periphery, and I am honored to welcome you all today to this evening's lecture, The Importance of Being Piro, Piro and her Gulabdasi sect in mid-19th century Punjab. Um, prof- uh, we are truly fortunate today to be joined by Professor Anshu Malhotra. Professor Malhotra is a deeply respected and widely admired historian whose scholarship has brought new sensitivity and nuance to the study of gender, identity, and vernacular cultures in South Asia. Currently based at the University of Hyderabad, where she served as professor in the Department of History. She has also held the esteemed Sita Kapadia Endowed Chair in Sikh Studies at the University of California, Santa Barbara. Her academic journey began with a Ph.D. from the School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London. Professor Malhotra's work is marked by an exceptional commitment to recovering and interpreting voices from the margins, especially those of women, subaltern groups, and vernacular writers. Her first monograph, Gender, Caste, and Religious Identities, Restructuring Class in Colonial Punjab, is a pioneering exploration of how social hierarchies were reconstituted in colonial Punjab, paying particular attention to the entangled workings of caste, gender, and religious identity. Her more recent work, Piro and the Gulabdasis, Gender, Sect, and Society in Punjab, is a profoundly sensitive and richly textured study of the courtesan poet Piro and the heterodox Gulabdasi sect. With great care and scholarly humility, Professor Malhotra reads vernacular texts to illuminate how alternate modes of religiosity and femininity challenged dominant moral and social orders in 19th century Punjab. In addition to her monographs, she has co edited several influential volumes. Among them, Speaking of the Self, Gender, Performance, and Autobiography in South Asia stands out for its thoughtful engagement with autobiographical writing by South Asian women. Through these writings, Professor Malhotra opens new methodological possibilities for understanding voice, performance, and the subtle articulations of selfhood under the constraints of patriarchy and empire. Professor Malhotra is also deeply cherished as a mentor and teacher, and her work continues to inspire a generation of scholars across the disciplines of history, gender studies, and literary criticism. With remarkable grace and humility, she has contributed not only to our academic understanding of South Asia's pasts, but also to a more inclusive and empathetic historiographical imagination. Without further ado, let's begin today's session. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you so much, Radhika, for that very generous introduction. I'm very, very grateful to all of you for inviting me for this lecture. And particularly Pallab, I don't see him here, but he's the one who's done all the correspondence, and I really appreciate this effort that you students from diverse universities, because I had a sense that this was the Nehu and Rabindra Bhavan universities that were doing it, but there seemed to be a wider audience, and I'm very, very grateful for being invited for this. So without any ado, I'm going to start sharing my screen, and I can get on with the lecture. And if there are any issues with it, please let me know. Okay, my screen is visible. Can everyone?
Yes, ma'am, but if you have loaded a PowerPoint or something, we haven't been able to see that yet. It just shows that you're presenting.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I don't know what happened again because I was. Okay, show my screen. Let me.
Ma'am, when you're sharing the screen, you have to choose the window that has the presentation on it. And I think the window that you've selected is the Google one, which is where the meet is taking place. So we can basically see your screen, which is showing us.
Okay. Let me try it again. So is that visible now? Share this window.
Yes, ma'am, it's perfectly visible.
Okay, great. Excellent. So I'm just trying to. Yeah. Okay, that's fine now, right?
Yes, it's fine. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. So I'm going to be speaking about this person, Piro, and her sect, on which I did research and published in, a while back. But I thought, since this is called Voices from the Periphery, it would be interesting to talk about what seems like a marginal and a peripheral voice. So let's just start by thinking about what historians do and why is a change of perspective from the periphery so important? Now, historians are just one of the many people who study the past, right? I think others study it. Certainly, politicians study it, but other literary figures, for example, who can take different kind of, I would say, liberties with the past, which I suppose a historian coming from the discipline itself cannot take. But we can talk about this later. Let me just, continue. If there are questions about how we as historians are different from others who study the past, we can come to that. Our methods are mostly archival. And Piro's manuscript was discovered in an archive in a library by a librarian called Santokh Singh, who goes by the nom de plume Shahryar. And he found it in what we call raddi, discarded stuff, the stuff that is to be sold to raddiwala, for example. And this gives you a sense of a voice that has been lost, right? And someone who may have been important at some point of time, but over the period of time, that voice has been muted, is it seems not an important enough person to be preserved. And this, of course, is also a gender thing. Why is someone who happens to be a woman and a woman from a particular kind of a background, her voice has, been muted over a period of time. So that is an interesting question for us to think about. However, now he was able to retrieve it, and he was able to retrieve it at a time when interest in gender history was growing among other peripheral sorts of peripheral to the mainstream discipline of history writing, which history is very closely associated all through its journey with power and centers of power. So it's
Ma'am,
only when
I'm really sorry to interrupt, but I think the slide it's stuck on the first slide. If you've changed the slide, we can't see it. Like it's stuck on slide one.
you're just seeing this one, not this.
No, we're seeing the title. It says the importance of being Piro.
Oh, so I don't know what to do about
Yeah, now
that.
we can see it. Now we see
Oh,
the
okay. So I'll
slide.
do it like this then. Okay.
Oh,
Because I had made it full screen, but if you can't see it, if you can see it
yeah,
now, it's fine. Yeah.
yeah, we can see it.
Okay. Great. Okay. So I'm just saying what is there on the slide, what historians do, and why was Piro's manuscript, at a time it was lost and it has been retrieved, and retrieved at a time when we have more or less become more and more interested in looking at history of gender, but also other kinds of histories, history from below, histories of labor, histories of peasants, and so on and so forth. And so this manuscript is now available in Amritsar in the Guru Nanak Dev University, GNDU library. And that's where I, took many trips to understand it. I want to just emphasize that this is, even though the script, even though Piro was a denizen of mid-19th to 1870s, she dies in 1872, her worldview and her style of writing is not at all influenced by colonial modernity in many ways. Okay. One, of course, the reason is that Punjab itself is fully colonized only in 1849. And so, colonial modernity comes a little bit later into Punjab, but also because she is very comfortable with her sort of milieu in which she has been brought up and a milieu that she is very familiar with. So she is not affected by colonial modernity and the kinds of literature that will come with it. So for me, who had done earlier work on, printed stuff, on reformist stuff, getting into the mind of this person, getting into the style of this person, her genre of writing was very, very difficult for me. So it took me a while to do it. So again, I thought that's an interesting thing. So, in a sense, what has been going on, and not just me, other people have got interested in her. We have been recuperating Piro from oblivion in some senses. And this is the question that I was just tackling: who gets to have a history? What is the relationship between history and power? That is something very interesting. And for me, uh, because I had started my work on women's history, on gender history, it became, getting into the mid-19th century and getting a woman's voice who was very, very agential was absolutely surprising and exciting. And that's how I got interested in, doing Piro's history. So just to familiarize, I'm sure this is an audience that is really, well aware of these things, but why doing women's history or gender history or feminist history is important, and what is the difference between these three? Because all the three are in ways aligned with my study of Piro. So women's history is, really women have been absent from history for a very long period of time because history was the history of those who had power, right? They are the ones who got to have a history. They're the ones who got to have records. They're the ones who had literacy. And so women, not located most of the time with power, did not have a history. So it's important to write women's history, but also gender history to tell you that relationships between women are also relationships with men, right? And so when you're doing women's history, you're also, in a sense, doing gender history. And feminist history, of course, is the fact that you are talking about rights for women. I mean, you're also invested in a future where, women have opportunities that everyone has, right? Women and many other people. And what was really interesting about Piro was that in a time where, as I said, she's not affected by colonial modernity, so, notions of liberalism or any other ism are not available to her, she is extremely agentive and, in a sense, almost like a proto-feminist, in the way in which she argues for her voice to be heard, right? And the complete belief she seems to have that her voice matters, that she herself matters, and the sense of self that she has. So, in that sense, there is a sense of exhilaration that the historian also has when you find that in times that did not have this kind of a vocabulary available to women, she wrote with a sense of agency, and those established lessons for the future for all of us. But I'm going to go back to what historians do. How did I get to understand her? Not just for me to get to her voice, but to understand the milieu from which she was coming and to get to the sources that also tell us about the sect. I use the word sect, but in Punjab, the word that we use is very often dera or panth. So which is the dera, which is the panth that she's coming from? So I looked at a number of Sikh sources, and this is Gyani Gyan Singh's, very important historian of the 19th century. And in 1880, he published his Sri Guru Panth Prakash. Actually, this is the better, where it's not the more clear one, but Panth Prakash, you can see that this is the cover of the very large tome that he wrote on the Sikh history. And along with it, he wrote another text which has got much more attention. But this is where, towards the end of this text, I found some literature on the Gulabdasi sect. So what I want to emphasize here is that the 19th century also created Sikh reformism of a particular kind, which uh, pushed the Sikh people to have a particular kind of an identity, which is the one that was approved by the reformers of this period. But the fact that in 1880, other sorts of sects, and Gyani Gyan Singh himself was a Nirmala Sikh, and the Nirmalas were a very literary kind of a sect. They did a lot of Vedantic study, they did a lot of Sanskritic study, and of course, also, as we see, he was very interested in writing a history of the Sikhs. So this is the kind of source that was very, very important to me. Besides him, there was also in 1926 another Nirmala Mahant Ganesha Singh wrote Bharat Mat Darpan, in which he wrote about the philosophies, very important philosophies of India. And then within that, there was again a reference to the Gulabdasis. But the best way for us to understand Piro is to look at her own writing. So, and of course, I've also looked at Guru Gulabdas's writing, which I'll come to in a minute. So looking at a lot of, a range of this kind of literature, including certain colonial settlement reports and so on that spoke about, the Lahore Kasur area where this sect was based, I found that there are a number of, such references that I could use to understand the sect and to understand her own writing. So this picture that you've also put in your flyer, or you've put half of this picture in the flyer, you'll see that this lower half is not there on your flyer. But this is a picture that I found in someone who had worked in 1984. He had, this Gyanendra Sevak had published this, had written his Ph.D. thesis on the Gulabdasi sect. And this is a picture that is available there. I haven't found the manuscript where this picture was available. But this has become the basis for, modern contemporary depictions of Piro and Gulabdas. But it is obviously probably available in a text. I did try to call up this person and ask him, but he was no longer interested in this work and he was unable to help me. But what is really interesting is that this is a typical, let's say, late 19th century lithographed picture that was available. And it, shows, it's a particular kind of a depiction of the Guru and Piro. And it gives you in Gurmukhi script, that this is Guru Gulab Das, this is Piroji, and this particular person who has a fly whisk in his hand, which also tells you a little bit about the majesty of the Guru, who has, the sun behind him, the aura behind him, which is obviously that he's a very, very respected person. This is who was to be the successor of the Guru. But what is really interesting about this picture is that there is a musical performance happening in the foreground of this picture. So someone is probably playing a sarangi, someone is probably playing drums, someone is sitting here, and this lady is performing. And I think this gives you a sense of a very different time period. And I'll just speak about Piro's background, which was in, she came from a brothel and then came into this sect. So it tells you about a time when the society was different and Victorian values that completely othered certain sections of society and had particular understanding of sexuality was absent, in this picture. The other thing that I want to point out is to look at these two arches, and we'll see, I'll show towards the end of my talk, this is actually the Gulabdasi Dera that was present in the Kasur district, which is now um, uh, in Pakistani Punjab. Okay, so Punjab, of course, as you know, has been divided uh, during the partition, and the story that we are going to be tracing today is a story based in Kasur and Lahore, which were obviously the heart of Punjab at this point of time. Okay, so just take a look at this, and then I'm going into the next picture to show how that particular picture has been used now to put color in it, make contemporary prints which show Guru Gulabdas and Piro, and of course, Guru. This is Har Gobind Ji, who was the successor to the Guru. But the Guru is also taking in from a very established, popular depictions of within the Sikh community. You'll see that, of course, he's holding a rose, which probably reflects his own name, Gulab. And, there's a hawk that's present, which is very often associated with the 10th Guru. So, there are these aspects, these objects, human, non-human animals, and the way in which they are depicted, you can see there's a history of looking at things and depicting them in particular ways. What is also interesting is this little handkerchief in her hand, which is shaped like a bird. Can you all see that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay. And I think that's there in the older picture as well, but that's too small for me to be able to show it to you. I don't know what the significance of that is, but here she's portrayed as this very pretty woman, very fair, with wearing bejeweled, and perhaps this is a sign of a kind of a cultural accomplishment, whatever it might be. And this is again, just concentrating on Piro. Again, she is shown as fair and gorgeous, bejeweled, and it tells you maybe a little bit. It kind of points a little bit to her background. As I said, I don't know. I don't have her full dates. I don't know the year she was born, but she died in 1872. And the story that I'm going to come to in a minute was a story that occurred probably in the 1830s, and I'll come to that. And she is described by Gyani Gyan Singh, who's Pant Prakash I was speaking about, as a Kasbi, which means that she is a prostitute, and that she was very beautiful. But the roop, her roop was beautiful. And then this is a picture from a more authentic, compilation of some of the works of Guru Gulabdas, and this is used in the present day Hansi Dera of Hansi is in Haryana. Hansi Dera of the Guru of Gulabdasis, and I have been in touch with the present day Hansi Guru. He's the one who shared this picture. So this is available in a very important manuscript that they have that has a range of Guru Gulabdas's writings. And you see the Guru depicted here. He's shown as not fair. He's what we call in Hindi Samla. And again, he has these very important disciples. But in this corner, you also have Piro, who's depicted not fair. Again, this is interesting. And she is, of course, sitting, paying her respect to the Guru. The Guru himself is shown as very, very important. And, the very fact that he has a fly whisk, he sits under this canopy, he sits in a particular way, and again, he holds a handkerchief in a particular way. But what is really remarkable about this is that he wears an aigrette. An aigrette, kalgi, what we call, is a sign of your nobility, of your royal background, but he wears a double kalgi. So just, which probably shows how significant or how important he is. Of course, this is a depiction that's coming from within the sect itself. Okay, so this is a description of Gulabdas by Gyani Gyan Singh. And Gyan Singh's understanding Gulabdas was this very handsome man, okay? And to just quote him, he writes of Gulabdas as Chanchal Chit chatartha chokha, sundar adhak jawane, Shiri Sukhan Prakari Bhari Mohit Pak Bakhane, which means that he was playful, he was clever, very handsome, and bursting with youthfulness. He was sweet tongued, varied versifier, and charming in his speech. And so you can see that his description of Gulabdas is someone who is very, very charming and whose sweet tongue, his speech, can influence people. And Piro also writes of him in her writing that Piro sone samle mukh sada haste, sastar bastar ang mo tan lag suhande. Like she says that he was a dark complexioned looker with a smiling face, looking grand in his dress and weapons. And so again, if you go back to it, he has his sword and his weapons are there. He is grand. He's sitting in, this grand manner. And of course, we can't see what his speech was here, but of course, he has a lot of writing that was available. Before I go on to saying, what Piro story is, let's just think about why Piro is important. And since your platform is called Voices from the Periphery, what makes her coming from the periphery, how do we understand that? So she definitely comes from the very margins of society. She calls herself low caste. Sudar, twice, in her writing, she calls herself Sudar Besva, that is a low caste prostitute, and Sudar Nari, that is a Shudra Nari, a low caste woman. And so she's low caste. She's also Muslim, and she's a courtesan, oblique prostitute. I don't use the word sex worker because I don't think that quite captures the complexity of the cultural milieu from which she comes. And so she's calls herself low caste. She's also a Muslim who runs away and puts herself in a Sikh establishment, but a Sikh, I would actually say a Sikh/Hindu establishment, because there is a kind of a continuum between them, which is important for us to remember. And then she's also a prostitute who goes into a religious establishment, a dera, which is very often a celibate place, or has at least some of the disciples who are meant to be celibate. Okay, so this is the kind of periphery that she comes from, and she breaks those barriers and goes and starts living in this dera. Gyani Gyan Singh, Mahant Ganesha Singh refer to her, and she herself, you'll see it in other writings, she's very often referred to in these local vernacular terms, which all point to her career as someone who offers all kinds of cultural and sexual services. Like she's called Randi, she's called Kasbi, she's called Kanchani, Kanjari, Ganka, Besya. These are some of the terms that one comes across. And then she becomes important in her Gulabdasi sect later on. And of course, what makes her really, really important is, and particularly for historians, and all of you are budding historians, is that she writes and she leaves behind a record. Now, as I've been saying all this while, that not everyone has the ability or the literacy to leave a record. So she has that, both a sense of self and the ability to write, and so she leaves behind a record that was almost lost, but we have over time recuperated it. And more significantly still, she writes in an autobiographical mode, not an autobiography by any stretch of the imagination, because how we understand a modern autobiography is very often that someone is sitting down and reflecting on their lives and writing about their lives, very often from the very beginning to the moment that they're writing. But she writes about an episode of her life, right? And which was obviously life transforming, what we can call a kind of a conversion narrative. That's what she gives us. And that is really, really significant. So she writes her, what is 160 kafiyan or 160 kafis, but she also writes acrostic verses or siharfis, that is 30 alphabet. So every line starts with an alphabet, and these are alphabets picked up from the Perso-Arabic script. And so she has three of these Sanji, and she has three of these Siharfis, and then she also has a Sanji Siharfi, that is a jointly written Siharfi with her guru, and she also has a Rak Sagar. So she leaves not a massive record, but a substantial record behind. So that is, I think, what makes her so significant and so important. And that's just a page from her 160 Kafiyan, which is, as I said, her autobiographical, episodic moment that she speaks about, which is available in the Gurmukhi script. But you see that why this was so difficult for me to, after looking at printed material, was that this was a handwritten one, and you don't have the word breaks. So the modern kind of spelling and punctuation and all of that is not available in this kind of a script. So what were the enabling factors that allowed someone like her to flourish? I think that is an important thing that we need to find out, because it's very rare that you have a woman from a background like that she had, to be able to feel empowered enough to do what she did, to leave her brothel, to come and live in a dera, to get established in a dera, and to leave a record, to indulge in literary activity. So I think definitely her sect and the guru played an important role, to the extent that the guru, and this is within a Sikh sectional tradition, where you had a guru who believed in Advaita non-dualism and the logic of it. Now, Advaita or non-dualism is this kind of monism, is that there is a supreme Brahman and that you're a part of that supreme Brahman. In fact, the mantra of a lot of Advaita is Soham. So we are him, kind of a idea that the substance of the supreme Brahman is present in everyone, and it is this quest to find that is that's the path that you have to undertake to achieve it, right? So this is very interesting, and the logic of it, if worked to the extreme in a society that has hierarchy of caste, right, should be that everyone has that substance of the supreme one in them, right? Whether you are from low caste or high caste, whether you are a woman or a man or, anyone else. Now, not all sects who believed in Advaita carried this logic to its extreme. I won't say that Gulabdasis did, but they did to a much larger extent than most sects who apparently advocated Advaita. And so you had a number of people within the sect who came from subordinate castes, and you also had a few Muslims, including Piro, in this sect. But of course, to say that there was an enabling environment should not take away the agency, the ability to push yourself into the foreground as Piro did, okay? So yes, an enabling environment is very important, but it is also the ability of the person to find that strength, that confidence, that consciousness that what I am is significant. So I think I don't want to downplay the agency that she herself had. And so, this is one of the very many other texts that the that Gulabdas wrote. This is called Pothi Gulab Chaman, that is a book of Gulab Chaman, which is where some of the Advaita, when I read through this particular text, I saw some of the Advaitic understanding of the universe that is available in this particular text. So I'm now going to tell you the story that she tells us in her Ek Sau Saath Kafia. And this is literally, this is the text that I saw, the manuscript that I saw did not have the first 8 kafis in it. Kafis is just a form of versification, a simple form of versification. Each kafi was composed of, 6 lines. So she actually tells us her story, which is, of course, the poetic mode of telling story, in as brief as 960 lines. So not for her, this gigantic ways of, indulging the self that the modern way of writing prose is. I think what is significant about poetry is that you can say things in a far more abbreviated form and carry enormous meaning in it. So it's not a very large text. It's a text of 960 lines. And towards the end of the text, it's written that this is the end of the 160 kafis, Ek Sau Saath Kafia, Samaptam. And this is where I picked up this title, Ek Sau Saath Kafia, because it's a very simple thing that says 160 kafi. And now it has become, you heard this particular text is called Ek Sau Saath Kafia, which is interesting as well. Now, this is a complaint. It's a lamentation. It's rhetorical. It's self-fashioning. She justifies the action that she has taken. But it's a captivating tale that she gives of her own initiative and the consequences of it. So let's go back to what Gyani Gyan Singh said about Gulabdas, that he was this, good-looking, charming man with a lot of charisma. And it is there that Piro writes in her kafis that she heard the Guru give a discourse in the Moti Bazaar of Lahore. Okay, so in this pearl market of Lahore, she heard him speak. She was very impressed with him. And then we don't know what she did, but next she just puts herself inside the dera. So one assumes that at some point of time, she left the brothel and came to Guru's dera and starts living in this dera. And the dera that actually I visited in Lahore, in Kasur, was in Chatiawala village, a part of the Kasur district. And so what is the story she gives us? The story that she gives us is that she comes and starts living in this dera with the Guru because she is interested in finding a path towards emancipation and liberation. But her wardens, her guardians, people who she left behind, people who probably depended on her for their income, followed her. And they ask the Guru that they should let her go with them. And then she tells us that she persuades the Guru, okay, let me go with them because I will go back and persuade them to my point of view. So she actually goes back with the people whom she had left earlier. And there it seems that, and the way she depicts it, and of course, remember, an autobiographical text is highly self-fashioning. This is her version of the story. And this is her version of the story that she would like people to believe, her sect to believe, people out there to believe. So, we have to keep that in mind. And so she says that she goes back, but once she goes back, what they seem to be interested in is the fact that she's become a novice of Guru Gulabdas, which also means that she has left her religion. So she is no longer a Muslim, and they're very upset about that. And so they try to convert her to Islam again, or reconvert her to Islam. And she says that she doesn't want that. And when she refuses their proposal, they kidnap her. And they kidnap her and they take her away from Lahore and they take her to Wazirabad, which is a city in Gujranwala district. And they take her and they keep her captive as a prisoner over there. And she describes the place. It's like a 4-storied place, and they put her on the top floor, and there are guards around her, and she's stuck there. However, she tells us two things, and this is an initiative coming from her, that she befriends two women there, Janu Rehmati, who help her out, and that she writes a letter, a missive to the Guru, asking him to help her be rescued from here. And then she says that the Guru dispatches two of his disciples, Chatar Singh and Gulab Singh, who come and, with the help of her friends, with her own planning, with the work of these disciples who have come, this is really like a Hindi film, that she kind of replays over here. However, she also puts this in the language of Ramayana, which is absolutely fascinating. She is the, obviously Sita here, who has been kidnapped. The Guru is the Ram who is dispatching Angad and Hanuman. So Chatar Singh and Gulab Singh become Angad and Hanuman in the way she writes it in her kafis. So, her kafis are therefore, you can see this, they're full of poetic allusions, metaphorical references, which are really interesting. And then she writes that, so she writes all this scheming and, how they are trying to work out her escape. But the actual story of the escape, she writes, is the miracle of the Guru. So again, the worldview here is very different. And she wants to give her respects to the Guru, and she wants to talk about his miracle-making power. So she says, like, when she walked out of her captivity, she touched the doors and the locks fell away. The guards went off to sleep. She walked through the city of Wazirabad, and the guards on the city gates did not see her. And then, they get onto horses, and the three of them, Gulab Singh, Chatar Singh, and Piro, they run away from Wazirabad. So that is a miracle. So it's a Guru's miracle that she wants to emphasize, while she also emphasizes her own planning, her own agency in this whole business. So again, it's very interesting. And what we see is that the rest of her life, she becomes an important part of this Gulabdasi establishment. She is almost like a consort of the Guru. They are always depicted side by side in a number of pictures. So she is a kind of a partner, kind of a consort of him. And she gains, obviously, respect. And at least in my interactions with the present-day Hansi data, though a lot of people do not know about her background in a brothel, people are aware of her, and definitely the present-day Guru knows that, I have been interested in her story. So he refers to her as his mother and, gives a lot of respect to her. Okay. So let's go back to the story of conversion and of religious conflict that she talks about. Now, this has a background in, Punjabi and Sikh history as well. The conflict in the 18th century between the Sikhs who were trying to grasp power from a declining Mughal rule, but also many other people who are interested in 18th century Punjab. So there are Afghans, there are the Marathas, there are the Mughals, there are the Sikh, the Khalsa sects, the missiles who will come to power by the end of by the second half or the last quarter of the 18th century. But why does she emphasize the religious conflict so much? So, for example, I'm just giving you some of the quotations from her writing. She says that when she goes back, they try to reconvert her, and they say, they tell her, Aval kalma yaad kar par sifat amane, hosi pak wali te saitan harame. First, remember the kalma and read the recuperating verse. So be purified, you illegitimate, devilish woman. So they curse her that why did she leave her religion? And again, she talks, that the mullahs came with their books under their arms and they confronted her and they said, why have you given up your religion? And the way she depicts giving up her religion is, कहे मुलाने काफिरे क्यों दीन गवायो कहा ने तुझे बिगाड़ियो जिन सूर खिलायो. That the mullah said, oh unbeliever, why did you lose your religion? Who spoiled you by making you eat pig? So, a very kind of a symbolic giving up of religion is what she talks about. So she says that there's a lot of uh, anger, angst that is going on when she goes back. But along with that kind of emphasis that she puts on uh, the religious conflict, she also digs very deep into a Bhakti Vaishnav inheritance of the Gulabdasi Dera, but also hers, which she uses as an empowering imaginary for herself. So Bhakti religion, which, as all of you I'm sure are aware, was popular amongst subordinate castes, and there were a lot of women bhaktas as well, which spoke against caste hierarchy, which challenging religious authority has a very deep tradition in Punjab, not so much with bhakti, but as much as with very popular Sufi saints, like Bulle Shah or Shah Hussain. They challenge religious authority in very, very significant way. And in obviously something, Bhakti saints were also very, very significantly invested in dignifying labor. And so it's a religion that advocated simple routines of devotional and community affirming practices. And we'll see that, someone like Kabir or Ravidas or Mirabai are referenced, not Ravidas so much, but certainly Kabir and Mirabai are referenced in her work. And of course, we know that the Guru Granth Sahib, the scripture of the Sikhs, carries the voice of 15 bhaktas within it, including that of Kabir Ravidas. Not Mirabai, though, interestingly, but Piro references it. So, on the one hand, you have her speaking about religious conflict, and on the other hand, she talks about moving beyond religious conflict to look internally and to find an empowering imaginary that goes beyond these kinds of differences, these artificial differences of the society, right? And so Kabir particularly, you'll find that this bhakta is very, very significant to Piro, and occasionally she uses, Kabirian mystical upside down language as well, what we call Ulta Bamsi. She uses this kind of mystical, Kabir's rhetoric, Kabir's poetry is notoriously difficult to understand because a lot of it is very, very esoteric. And he talks about Purbi language, the Eastern language. And you'll find that Piro also occasionally uses that kind of verses in her writing. So, for example, in one, total imitation of Kabir, she says, Piro boli purbi samjhe na koi, jo purab ka ho vasi samjhega soi. That Piro speaks the Eastern language, which is a complete reference to Kabir, and no one understands. But the one from East, and that East in Kabirian understanding is the land, the mystical land of knowledge in some ways, right? So, there is emulation of Kabir in her work. So she puts herself, and so again, going back to her background, where she calls herself a Sudar Nari, a Sudar Veswa, she identifies herself with other low caste saints, other subordinate caste saints who have played, I think, such a significant tradition that we have in the Indic ethos about the challenging to caste norms, for example, from these saints. So this is a sample of her poetry where she talks about Nama छिपा तार्यो अरसैना नाई कबीर जुलाहा उधार्यो तुम भय सहाय चोर या रजुआरियों पर कृपा कीनी बाल्मीक निस्तार्यो तुम जात न चीनी पीपा जात चमार था अर सदना कसाई पीरो कहसी सतगुरु तुम नीच तराई. So you ferried across Nama, the calico printer, and Saina, the barber. You helped in the emancipation of Kabir, the weaver. You bestowed kindness on princes and thieves. You ferried Balmiki without looking at his caste. Pipa was a leather worker and Sadna a butcher. Piro says, Satguru, you ferry the downtrodden. So she identifies herself with this. And along with identifying herself with this, she also identifies with the suffering that a number of them, went through, particularly Kabir, again. And here she also references Mansur, who was a 10th century Sufi who was seen to be going out of the norms of Islam and who was, hung for his pain. So here she references that. Piro kaisi Satguru in Sara Pyari. गोते दियो कबीर को इन बिना विचारी सूली दियो मंसूर को खल समस लाही और दुखाए केतड़े हम केत सुनाही. So Piro says Sadhguru, they love the Sharia, that is, those who have religious authority. Thoughtlessly, they try to drown Kabir. This is a reference to Kabir in Banaras, who, Brahmins complained to the Lodi power at that point of time, and he's sought to be drowned. And of course, he escapes that. This is, some of the mythology associated with Kabir. So thoughtlessly, they tried to drown Kabir. They hung Mansur and they flayed Shams. What more suffering shall I relate? So she identifies with the suffering of these saints. But at the same time, she challenges religious authority. And I've said that her Iksasat Kafia there is also rhetoric, there's also anger, at people who tried to kidnap her, people who tried to, establish their power over her. And so, she challenges religious authority of Hindus, she challenges religious authority of Muslims and Sikhs, and particularly what's really interesting about what I'm going to read out to you is that she asserts her gendered identity. She, as a woman, none of the religious authority should have any power over her. And so she says, Ling much ko kaat ke ye turak banahi, nari kya banao so tandono nahi. Snipping the penis and the mustaches, they make turaks. What will you make of a woman? She has neither. Choti janju hind pana ye baat na koi. Nari ka keej hai tis dono nahi. That, top knot, sacred thread, Hinduness, what is this? What will you do with a woman? She doesn't have either a top net or the sacred thread. And again, to Sikhs, she says, Banyo Sikh banot kar lak kacha payo, nari kachna paile. This kai karis. And here she's talking about a particular Khalsa identity, which, asks the Khalsa to wear the 5Ks, including the long drawers. And she says a woman doesn't wear that. So she challenges religious authority of all kind. And what she also does is she tells her story, and this is the metaphorical, looking at allusions, how you write. In a remarkable writing, A.K. Ramanujan has spoken about that, in the pre-modern period, you did not need what is seen as an obsession with modernity, that you have to be completely what the word that we use today is authentic, that this is just yours, that, this has come from your mind, your heart, whatever. Whereas in pre-modern period, there was no need for this kind of originality, right? So she takes on the persona of Heer when she challenges the mullah, the very major kissa in Punjab of Heer and Ranjha, and one of the Heer is a fairly agential woman, and she challenges the mullah, that what you're telling me is sophistry. So Piro, when she challenges the mullahs, is in a sense imitating Heer, right? So she imitates Heer. I've told you that she takes on the persona of Sita. She uses Mira's voice. Mira's voice she uses a couple of times, but one of the ways in which she does is Piro pi pyala matwari hoi, which is referring to Mira, that Mira drinks from the cup and becomes, intoxicated. Piro, emulates that. And she also calls herself the Shakti of her guru. So, she uses all these very significant, beloved women characters in pre-modern poetics to write about herself, to fashion herself. So that's a really interesting aspect of the way Ixosat Kafia has been written. And this, just finishing up, this is the tomb now in a completely dilapidated state where Piro and Gulabdas are buried side by side. I don't think this is going to survive for very long. But this is the inside of it. And I was telling you about the two arches in that picture that we saw earlier, that I was able to capture when I, visited this. And finally, my last slide to ask you people, does Piro speak to us today? Have we overcome the challenges that she faced about women in society, about caste, and what is seen as acceptable, what is not seen as acceptable, on being able to find our individual paths without upsetting those who are invested in controlling us? So in many of these ways, I think she remains important, but obviously it's up to you people to let me know if that is the case. So thank you very much. And I'm going to stop presenting.
Thank you so much, Professor. We'll be opening up for questions. So if anyone has a question, please feel free to raise your hand and unmute yourselves and speak, or you can type it into the message box. While people here are still typing, there are some questions from YouTube that I'll just read some of them out to you. Let me just read one out. Is that okay with you?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So the first one is, given the deeply entrenched hierarchies of caste, gender, and religious orthodoxy in colonial Punjab, how do we understand the internal contradictions within the Gulabdasi sect's supposed inclusivity, especially when Piro's presence seems both central and yet precariously tolerated in a space founded by a male guru?
Yes, I mean, that's society for you, right? This is, I'm not surprised by it at all. I think, as I said, there are certain enabling factors that are there. Advaita bent of a sect and of a guru. The fact that the guru is very close to her, probably they had intimate relations as well. So she gets, support from him. But I don't think, society loses its prejudice just because someone is, one, thinking about Advaita philosophy to the ultimate way in which you can imagine it, right? That the substance of the supreme Brahman should be present in everyone, and so there should be egalitarianism within not just the sect but society. But not everyone is capable of overcoming these prejudices. And as we know, that caste prejudices are very deeply rooted in our society. They're very, very deeply embedded in people's consciousness. I mean, we got our constitution in 1950 that did away with caste hierarchies, but have we overcome them? We haven't, right? They're present in society. Society has changed. You can't say the caste is the same. So, caste has changed, evolved, emerged in different ways, in different contexts, but it hasn't disappeared, right? So it's a struggle. It's a matter of continually fighting against it. And I just want to add that if we have issues with caste, I think gender hierarchies are even more deeply embedded in society. And it's again a struggle to continuously, find ways of overcoming them. But it's not something that is achieved right away.
Thank you, Professor. I'll move on to the next question then. Um, It says, is it intellectually honest to celebrate Piro as a proto feminist or a radical iconoclast of her time without critically confronting the socio political invisibilization that followed her death? And does this selective historical resurrection serve more to soothe contemporary liberal appetites than to engage with the full discomfort of her marginality?
Wow, can you read that again?
Yes, ma'am, of course. Uh, is
Quite a
it
longish one.
It is. Is it intellectually honest to celebrate Piro as a proto
Oh, she's talking
feminist?
about my, okay, got it. She's talking about my intellectual honesty or not. Well, I think I'm being honest to what I think. Um, why are we excited by certain people, right? Yes, the time following her lost her voice, and the time following that has recuperated her voice. So the thing is that at a particular time in mid-19th century, when you do not expect someone coming from the kind of background that she came from to be able to say the kind of things that she said, right? To be able to be so conscious of her gendered identity and to be so conscious of the background, and to say that I can overcome this and aim for liberation and aim for partnership with the guru. I think it's remarkable. And my intellectual honesty or anyone else's intellectual honesty is to say that yes, she achieved that, right? Yes, society loses it all the time, right? But you have a record that can be recuperated by us to think about ways in which we can change society today or empower people through embeddedness within their culture. I mean, what is remarkable about her is that she was embedded in her culture. She uses the cultural imaginaries that were available to her, whether it was the bhakti, whether it was here, whether it was, Kabirian voice, to empower herself in a way that was meaningful to her and to the society around her. Yes, we lose it, you know. We've had women prime ministers that we've lost it, right? Um, does that mean that that stops being important? I don't think so. I think it's how we use our past. And I think that is significant.
Thank you, Professor. I think there's a question in the message box. Rajiv Bala says, ma'am, how Sita, Radha, and Meera's characters influenced feminist and social discussions in today's world.
How they continue to define in today's world.
Yes.
Yeah, well, that's up to you to figure out. I think these are very, very important icons of our culture. And Sita's story, for example, has been written and rewritten and reimagined in so many different ways. So it can be, Sita can be, the story of Sita can be very patriarchal, right? She's put through the fire test, she's thrown away as a pregnant woman. But it has been imagined in so many different ways, right? Her lamentations, for example, have been used. I think there is a 16th century or a 17th century Bengali text that is like a Sitayana. It tells you the story of Sita rather than the story of Ram, right? So, this is a kind of a cultural resource that we have. And significantly, since this question has been asked, Piro does not use Sita in ways that Chandrayan Ramayan uses it, as a woman who's lamenting what happened to her. She gets into the role of Sita for someone coming from her kind of a background, saying that I'm like Sita to this Ram, and so I should be rescued. right? That I should be respected in a particular kind of a way. So I think the cultural resource that all these icons have left for us are so um, rich and malleable in many ways that you can construct different kinds of stories with them. And I think that's what, Piro does, and others who have written on them too.
Thank you, ma'am. We'll take one last question. There's one again from YouTube. Does the historical elevation of Piro today reveal more about our contemporary politics of virtue signaling and liberal recuperation than about Piro's actual socio political agency in mid 19th century Punjab? And if so, are we complicit in manufacturing a palatable subaltern?
Are we, sorry, read the last line again.
Are we complicit in manufacturing a palatable subaltern?
Wow, these are very, what should I say, uh, questions that are challenging the way I've read Piro in some ways. So this is interesting, we are always going to read the past from a contemporary point of view, right? We try to create the milieu as historians. That's our job, to try and understand what was the situation in mid-19th century Punjab or anywhere else or any other time that we are talking about, right? But the questions that we ask our sources, and clearly we are, situated in our own present, right? So the question that we ask our sources do come from our very often present perspectives, right? So I think there are two things to be said over here. One is, what do you do as historians, and how are you um, expected to understand a particular historical situation, right? And for that, there is a method that historians use, which is the archival method. They try to get as much as possible that, your uh, the sources that might be available to you will help you think about that particular time, right? The second thing is your own contemporary positionality, and what that contemporary positionality pushes you into investigating, into thinking about, into the questions that you ask your sources, and so on and so forth. So I think this kind of relationship between the past and the present is always going to be there. Your discipline is training you to look at the past in a particular method, is giving you a method to look at the past. But you, at the same time, your positionality is also a contemporary one. And I think the relationship between these two, right, will always be a kind of a dialectical relationship. There's no way to, escape that.
Thank you, ma'am. I know I said that it was going to be the last question, but I see that someone has raised their hand. So if you're amenable to it, we can ask them to.
Sure, sure, of course.
Vanshika, please unmute yourself and
Thank,
ask your question.
yeah. Thank you, ma'am, for letting me ask the question. Ma'am, though I joined the late session, yet, ma'am, the last point you mentioned about that, does Piro speak to us today, and have we overcome the challenges she faced? And the last
Mhm.
point that you said, that on being able to find our individual path without upsetting those who are invested in controlling us. So, ma'am, these two things are incompatible. I mean, those who are controlling us without upsetting them, and how can we chart out our individual paths when we are very being social and politically, we too being, I mean, we are not an individual as say per se, but rather part of society. So how could we chart out, and what do you think, reflecting on Piro's account? And as you mentioned, as I listened through that, though these are cultural icons, going back to Sita and coming to Piro, but though they are, but Piro being very much historical one, but Sita quite mythical, Draupadi quite mythical. So, how do you look at taking the inspiration from them to chart out individual paths, as you say?
Thank you, Vanshika, for your question. I think, the relationship between an individual in a society is going to be is a difficult one. Very often, the South Asian society is seen as a society where community matters much more, society matters much more than individual matters. This is how historically people have been looking at South Asian society. But your constitution, for example, gives individual rights, right? Whatever rights that you have are experienced by the individual. So the individual is seen by your constitution as someone whose rights have to be protected. So, that's one level of it. However, we live in a society where the society bears down upon us, right? Through different ways. It allows certain things to, let's say, women, doesn't allow certain things to women, the family that you might be coming, the community that you might be coming from, and so on and so forth. So this is a struggle. Life is about struggle, right? And your ability to sometimes break certain community rules to establish your individual empowerment, and at other times to bend yourself to the expectations that the community has of you. You have to find that balance, right? I think these icons that, Piro might be an icon, or the icons of a Draupadi or a Sita, these icons are a cultural resource that is available to you, right? So Piro used them as a cultural resource through which she affirmed for herself certain powers for herself, certain empowerment that she felt that she could use this culture for. And I think people have been doing that over a long period of time. And Draupadi, particularly Draupadi, right? Because Draupadi is is a woman who questions so much, right? In the Mahabharata, right? And someone who's not willing to be trampled over. So these are cultural resources, and how you're going to use them, to establish your, individual rights or individualities. This is the thing, right? How do we do it? How do we continue to be inspired and maybe sometimes break away from the way a culture or history is presented to us? So this is really a struggle that we are all in the midst of, right? Because very often, and particularly for women, I think the society bears rather heavily on them, right? The community and community's expectations from women are born by women very often by suppressing their individuality. But there are resources that are there, right? Both mythologically, historically, and constitutionally that are available to you. And what you make of them is really up to you. I don't know if I've answered your question, Vanshika, but these are difficult things, right? And these are the struggles that all of us are, in the midst of in many ways.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Well, then, with this, we come to the end of today's session. Thank you so much, Professor Malhotra, for this riveting lecture. This evening has been enlightening for us all. And thank you also to everyone who took the time to attend this session. Have a nice evening.
Thank you, Radhika. Thank you very much for hosting me. Bye-bye.
Bye, ma'am.